Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski, and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. David Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new team therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. David is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine.
One thing we wanted to make a little comment on some of the social action that's been taking place all around the United States and all around the world. Rhonda and I were both stunned and pretty enraged by the death of George Floyd, and I have no doubt that many of you have been feeling deeply disturbed as well. In fact, the social movement that's emerging reminds me a great deal of the civil rights movement of the 1960s when I was a medical student. And I believe this could be a tremendous opportunity for change.
There are many ingrained injustices in our society, and we are eager to do everything that we can to fight racism and support the Black community and all people of color. David and I, the leaders and our colleagues at the Feeling Good Institute, and members of the team community at large, are committed to being anti-racist and are discussing some specific steps that we will take, and we're looking for more that we can do.
For example, one thing is, I love our Tuesday training group at Stanford. This is a free group that's open to all Bay Area therapists who would like to get some training in the team model that we've developed. And we have a multicolor group of all races and religions and countries, and that's one of the things that I really love about it. But we'd like to become more multicolor. We'd love to have more Black therapists and brown therapists in our weekly training group. It's open to all therapists in the Bay Area. There's no charge for it, and we have a tremendous time. And one other thing is that we've mentioned that I'm working with several colleagues on a Feeling Great app to come out hopefully at the time my new book, Feeling Great, is released in September. But we're doing beta testing. Beta testers are people who listen to portions of what we're working on, and then they say, oh, this stinks, we don't like this, but we love this. And then we use that feedback to change it and upgrade it. And we'd love to have more Black and brown folks join us as beta testers, because if you provide your input as we develop this tool, which we hope can bring relief to people all around the world who are struggling and suffering and don't have access to good psychiatric or psychological care, your input will help us make sure that we're serving everyone who needs help with depression and anxiety.
Hello, Rhonda.
Hello, David. You sound like a yodeler. And welcome, listeners, to our episode 195. This is another episode on cognitive distortions, and today we're going to talk about magnification and minimization. And
great.
Right?
You have any emails to read?
I
today?
do. I have a couple of emails to read.
Because
we have one from Heather Clegg, who's a psychiatrist that she's been on podcasts before. She was on the music podcast that we did in the fall. And she was writing about the 2 CoronaCast podcasts that we did with Taylor Chesney. And she wrote, woohoo, to the podcasts. That both interviews with Taylor brought tears to my eyes. And I loved how Rhonda got her talking about how she and her husband met. I also loved hearing Taylor talk about her kids so gently during the interview. Thank you, Fabrice, for creating the podcast with David. And thank you, David, for continuing it. And another one is from...
Thank you for that, Heather. What a beat.
Yeah, that was really sweet. She's very enthusiastic. And here's another one from Dipti Joshi about the same podcasts. Dipti is our lead team therapist in India. And
Along with Nivedita.
Singh, right. Mm-hmm.
We have two powerful women in India leading the charge for team therapy, and they're both beautiful people.
Yes, tremendous. And Dipti wrote about the 2 Coronacast podcasts we did with Taylor. These were such a huge gift. It's such a real-time evidence to show that when our worst fears do become a reality, they lose the power to scare us. And only then we realize that our fear is a demon with no teeth. Thank you so much, Taylor, David, and Rhonda. And one really quick one is from Rose, who wrote, I really liked it on the Coronacast episode 6 when David said that when the worst happened for his clients, their depression and anxiety left completely. This is so comforting to hear how our thoughts can be more scary and damaging than the reality. Thank you all.
Thanks, and those are true aha moments, because what we teach is so basic that it goes in one ear and out the other. But when you suddenly see that events, Corona, that cannot upset you, it's only your thoughts can upset you, and that when you're depressed and anxious, your thoughts will virtually always be distorted and illogical. And when you put the light of those thoughts, your feelings will change. And I have had a lot of patients who just were in therapy. They were afraid of going bankrupt, and then 3 or 4 of them did go bankrupt. And the day they went bankrupt, their depression disappeared, because they suddenly saw that all their negative thoughts about going bankrupt weren't true. It wasn't true that they were homeless. It wasn't true that people stopped loving them. Depression, I've often said, is the world's oldest cons. Well, you've got a great case for us today on magnification and minimization. That's the number 6 of the 10 cognitive distortions that I first listed in my book, Feeling Good. And by the way, I guess by the time this is out, my new book, Feeling Great, will be available. It's already available for pre-order on Amazon. It's coming out in September, and if you want to pre-order it, you can. But because it's got a lot of new stuff on techniques, cognitive distortions, positive reframing, etc. But to focus on magnification and minimization, magnification, I call this the binocular trick. It's like blowing things out of proportion or shrinking their importance inappropriately. Like magnification is like when you exaggerate things and tell yourself things are far worse than they really are. A great example, a very good example of that is when you procrastinate, at least when I do. The thing I'm putting off, it starts to mushroom like Mount Everest. Oh, it's going to be so hard to clean up the filing in my office, or whatever it is that I'm putting off. It mushrooms through magnification. And then minimization is where you shrink the importance of something, like, if I only have a little time to work on it, that would be a drop in the bucket. I'll just put it off. And again, that's shrinking the importance of getting started on the task. But you can also do this, magnification in romantic situations. You meet someone and you start to magnify all their good qualities, and you fall in love with them. You get a crush on them. But what you're getting a crush on is this magnified version of their positive qualities turned into something that's probably very different from the way they really are. Romance is another one of the world's oldest cons. There's nothing wrong with love or loving relationships, but sometimes we do fool ourselves with these distortions. Tell us about magnification and minimization and your patient. Oh, let me just give you the names of some techniques that you can use. You can use examine the evidence. You can use the semantic technique, like instead of saying, oh, this is so terrible, or I'm such a loser, oh my gosh, I blew it on the podcast, and oh, the world's going to come to an end. Just use a little gentler language rather than making things seem so dramatic in your mind. And instead of saying, my gosh, I'm a total loser, you could say, my gosh, I screwed up on project X or Y, and this is something I need to work on.
And you call that the semantic technique, right?
Yeah, that's a semantic technique. Just using less colorful, exaggerated language when you give yourself messages that are upsetting to you. the if you're
And I think go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, if you're procrastinating, you can use little steps for big feats instead of trying to do everything. 8 weeks worth of work today. Just do a little. Give yourself 5 minutes of work. Just get started. The double standard technique is good. Would I talk to someone else this way? Would I say these exaggerated things to someone I loved and cared about? How would I talk to someone? And then, of course, the externalization of voices. Now I'll shut up and you can tell us about your patient and how you use these very techniques.
Okay. Well, this was a really profound. You talk about how weekly 50-minute sessions. How did those get started? This entire session was a 3-hour session that just happened because we both had more time and we just kept talking and continuing to go through the team model. And this is somebody who is divorced after a long-term relationship and has been divorced about 2 or 3 years and is now living alone because of the shelter in place and feeling really lonely and alone and wanting to get in a relationship with somebody somehow, maybe through an online dating service, but feeling really depressed and too depressed to begin in a relationship. And that's the negative thought that we focused on. I'm too depressed and scattered to be in a relationship. And his emotions about it were he was, sad, blue, depressed, down, unhappy. On that scale of 0 to 100, he was 90.
Give me his emotions.
The sad, blue, depressed, down, unhappy, that cluster of feelings.
Mm-hmm.
On a scale of 0 to 100, he felt 90.
Wow. What were his other emotions?
He was panicky at 50. He felt ashamed, 50. He felt worthless and defective, 50. He felt lonely, alone, abandoned, 90. He didn't feel embarrassed.
Mm-hmm.
He felt hopeless and discouraged and despairing, 90. Frustrated and stuck, 90. And upset, 90.
Great. Yep. Okay.
And when I asked him to describe to me what this particular negative thought said about him that spoke to his core values, or was just showed what an awesome person he was.
Can I just stop you for a second?
Yes.
We wouldn't just go into positive reframing, right?
Right.
We might.
No, I'm just jumping forward because of the podcast time.
Sure, but just a little brief thing. We might say to him, "What do you want in this session?" And he'd say, "Well, if a miracle would happen, well, then all these negative thoughts and feelings would go away. Telling myself I'm too scattered to be in a relationship and having all these 2, 4, 6, 2, 3, 7 negative feelings would be gone." And that's how most therapists are trying to help people make things go away. But instead, before we do that, we always do positive reframing. What do these negative thoughts and feelings show about you that's positive and awesome? And what are some benefits to you? Because paradoxically, if we can sell the person on not changing and show them how your suffering is the manifestation of what's most beautiful and awesome about you, paradoxically, that lowers the resistance and makes recovery makes recovery possible often in just a single therapy session, way faster than the treatments we had in the past. Now I'll shut up again.
No, that was great. That was really helpful. No, I mean, partly because the client isn't, or the patient isn't arguing with us.
Right.
If we're saying, "Oh, why don't you think of this?" or "Why don't you think of it that way?" or "Why don't you think of this way?" We're joining in with them and saying, "Hey, these things are really great. What do they show about you that
right.
shows what's working in your life? Or your symptoms are your friend. They're your strengths."
So what did you guys come up with?
Well, it really showed that he has a great deal of love for other people, and it.
When he says I'm scattered, too scattered to be in a relationship, it shows that he wants to present something good to another person, right? Is that what you're saying?
Right. Yes. Right. And it shows too that he respects other people.
Yeah.
Like he wouldn't want to get into a relationship with someone and then fail them because he was too depressed or scattered.
I love it.
And, it showed that he had high standards for himself. He doesn't just want to, slug his way through a relationship. He wants to be able to fully give himself and receive that in return, but he wants to be really present in a relationship with someone.
Well, that's awesome. That's beautiful. Any other positives?
Well, it did show that he had high standards. I'm sorry, that he was being realistic. Because, the situation he's in is kind of sad. He's living by himself. He's not having much interactions with other people, doing his work online.
And when he says I'm scattered, is that realistic?
That's realistic too.
Right. What else did you come up with?
Well, it's kind of appropriate to be sad. That goes along with being realistic. And he's willing to, face reality head on.
Yeah,
And-
it's appropriate
and not put his head-
to be sad because he wants a relationship and he's not in a relationship.
Right. And along with his love for others and his high standards and respect for other people, it's also showed that he has a passion for life.
Yeah,
He's not willing to settle.
yeah, right. And it also shows he's accountable when he says, I'm too scattered to be in a relationship. Again, he's assuming some responsibility for his role rather than blaming his ex-wife or blaming women or something like that. He's saying, I have to examine my own role. I think that's a beautiful thing.
Right. And once he said that, I have to examine my own role, he also said that part of it makes him feel courageous.
Oh, that's a cool thing, too. And why does that mean he's courageous?
Because it takes bravery to face your flaws.
Yeah, well, you can say that again. Now, he's also panicky and anxious. What does that show about him that's positive and awesome? What are some benefits
right now-
to him?
Well, right now the anxiety showed that he's being vigilant about staying safe.
But in the context of love,
And that because he's being vigilant about staying safe, he's staying by himself and he's not putting himself out there. And the anxiety's giving him, having him think about his future and motivating him to write ads for online dating services.
right. His
So
panic and anxiety reminds him to be vigilant that there's something he wants that he needs to be working towards, so he doesn't get complacent, that he really would like to develop a new relationship. And then he's ashamed and worthless. What are some awesome things about being ashamed and worthless?
Well, it shows how humble he is.
Oh, I love that.
He actually has so many positive qualities, but he doesn't focus on himself first.
Yeah, boy.
It also shows that he focuses on other people before he's putting his
I'm
needs.
getting fired up about this guy. I think I might like to date him. But I'm all joking aside, these really are beautiful qualities and much more we could add to this list. But you can often see the patient just melting away when we reframe what they thought was some, chemical imbalance in their brain, and all of a sudden you see, wow, all my negative thoughts and feelings are really coming from a beautiful place.
Yes.
All right. Well, then, how did he take to that?
He took it. He took it really well. It was a little, for a lot of people, it was a little difficult getting started at first.
Yeah.
But once you get one or two going, then he developed a lot of insight into himself.
Isn't it fun to do that?
It is really fun. Oh, he thought it also showed that he was a really nice person and that he was a loyal person.
Oh, yeah. And how did it show that?
Well, he's not, he's nice that he wants to be, the kind of person that a woman would choose to be with.
Yeah.
And that's really nice of him. And he's loyal. He doesn't want to just jump in to meet a whole bunch of different people and, fling them off. But he wants to really get into a serious relationship and be loyal to that person.
Oh, wow, that is so cool. Okay. Now, what are we going to do now? Then did he re-rate what he wanted his feelings to be with the magic dial?
Yes, he wanted them to go down to 5.
All of
He
them?
wanted them all to go down to 5.
Oh, okay. So his aloneness, his worthlessness, his shame, his panic, his sadness, his hopelessness, his frustration, and his upset, he thought 5 would be high enough.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Then what
And
did
actually,
you
he
do?
didn't want them to go down to 0 because he saw the importance of the qualities that they provide in his life.
That's the key to it. When patients want them to go down to 0, I mean, that's a bad omen. You can want some of them to go to 0, but we want you to desire, I mean, even if you say 10 or 15 or 20, that's good too, because you may overshoot your goal. But we really want the person to see that there is some benefit, because if he's not sad, if he's 0%, he says, oh, I don't have a woman in my life, I'm totally alone, I'm as happy as can be. So,
Right.
see, that would be a different kind of person that we would want to feel some sadness. Because my life is empty right now, and
Yeah.
I want a woman in my life. I want someone to love. So this is not just a trick. This is the real thing. Then what did you guys do? I love
Well,
your story here, Rhonda.
Well, the first thing we did was identify the distortions,
Okay.
and that's how we got to magnification and minimization.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because he said it is true that he's depressed, and it is true that he's scattered, but he was magnifying the depression and being the scatteredness. He was making it so much bigger than it was.
Oh.
And that didn't mean that he was not too depressed to be in a relationship.
Oh.
And he wasn't too scattered, for example, to write an ad for an online dating service.
Right. Right.
And the other thing he did was he minimized the great qualities that he could bring to a relationship. You know, he minimized the excitement that he brings to life and the intelligence that he has, and he minimized anything about himself as a person that would make a woman, because he's heterosexual, interested in being in a relationship with him.
Oh, that is so neat. That's neat. Now, before we go on to the fantastic things you did next, should we look at some other distortions in that thought? I'm too scattered to be in a relationship. It's classic magnification and minimization. Often there's other distortions as well. Did you find any others in that one?
Well, it was an overgeneralization.
Oh, yeah. And tell us
Because
why.
the negative, he hasn't always been scattered and depressed. He's actually a very accomplished person.
Oh.
In this moment in time, he's feeling scattered and depressed because of the shelter in place. And he overgeneralized it as a never-ending pattern in his life.
Oh, wow, I love that. That is cool. Any other distortions? I'm too scattered and depressed to be in a relationship right now.
Well, it was just what we talked about in the previous podcast. It was fortune telling.
Oh, yeah, cool.
Because he predicted that he could never be in a relationship. He predicted that his future would turn out badly.
And also,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I keep jumping in.
I know you probably want to say something.
I'm getting fired up here. Would it also be mind reading?
That's exactly right. His thought was that no woman would be interested in him, that all the women would view him negatively.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he was reading the minds of all the women in the world, or any woman that would happen across his ad, and it was also on all or nothing thinking.
Oh, yeah. How did that work?
Well, he had this absolute thought that no one would ever be interested in him because he's too depressed and scattered.
Yeah, like you're either totally scattered or totally unscattered.
Or you're attracted to all women, you're attracted to no women.
Yeah, I love that. You're talking about scattered. I've been feeling pretty scattered myself in the last few days. I think all of us have so much to keep up with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other distortions you found?
And emotional reasoning. I feel scattered, so I must be scattered.
I feel undesirable, so I must be undesirable.
Right. That's right.
That's a good one. Any others? I only found one other really powerhouse.
Really? Could it have been labeling?
Well, that's true too. Yeah, I love that. Any others? I only found one other overwhelming distortion?
Well, could it be self-blame?
I forgot about that. Yes, it's a huge self-blame. That's for sure, because he's kind of beating up on himself and blaming himself for everything. I love that, but there's only one more, the biggest one of all.
Is that a hidden should statement?
I love it, exactly. And what's a hidden should, and why is this a hidden should statement?
Well, I shouldn't be depressed if I'm in a relationship, or I shouldn't be in a relationship if I'm depressed. I shouldn't be in a relationship if I'm scattered.
Yeah, but it's also a should statement. I shouldn't be so depressed and scattered.
True.
Like somehow, condemning himself. I'm supposed to be happy all the time.
Right. Right. Even in a chaotic, difficult time, I should be happy like a Pollyanna.
Yeah. Now, one of our loyal listeners, I won't name his last name, but I would think he wouldn't mind, but just to protect Robert, who lives in Europe, and he was asking, are all the 10 distortions so different, or is there a pattern here? And there is a lot of overlap among them. I once did a factor analysis, and there's really 2 dimensions. One dimension is I'm no good, and the other one is you're no good.
Right.
Like the self-blame is the I'm no good, the other blame is you're no good. Mm-hmm. But I love the 10 distortions because they bring it to life in different ways. Like the magnification and minimization says something quite different from the should aspect. And
Yes,
that says something different from the self-blame aspect. So you did a beautiful job on that. Where did you guys go next?
Well, I did say that if we were in my office, I might suggest that we do a survey technique and wander around downtown Walnut Creek and ask people, come up with a question to ask people.
Yeah.
Like, do you think someone could be depressed or scattered and still be in a relationship?
Yeah.
And he was really interested in doing that, and he might do that on a walk.
You might even get
on
some
his
dates
own.
that way. I'm a little scattered, but very horny. Do you think any woman would be interested in me?
He would probably not say that. He'd probably, I'm a little scattered, but also lonely. Do you think I could still be in a
that'd be
relationship?
a softer way of putting it. Get more better responses that way.
I think he would. I think the other one might scare people away. Well, we actually did the double standard technique first. Mm-hmm. Where I was a twin of his or a clone of his who is experiencing the same things that he was experiencing, and feeling alone and lonely and feeling scattered and depressed, and I asked him to talk to me as if he would talk to his twin, his friend who was his twin and his clone who had the same life experiences. And I said to him,
What's the philosophy behind the double standard technique before you show us how it worked? What's the idea behind this technique? Because all of our listeners aren't totally versed in all of this.
Well, it's a really beautiful technique. It's very powerful. And it's a simple thesis that we're kinder to others than we are to ourselves. So if someone could speak to their twin or speak to a friend or in a kind, supportive way and talk back to their negative thought as they're consoling a friend.
So if you had a friend, would you tell your friend, "Oh gosh, Jim, you're too scattered and depressed to be in a relationship"? Would you say something like that to someone else?
Right. So after they kind of console their friend, we ask them, can you use those words to yourself? I mean, can you turn that on yourself? Can you talk to yourself the way you're talking to your friend?
In other words, you ask them, what would you say to a friend who was just like you?
Yes. Uh-huh. Yes.
And that step.
What would you say to a friend who came to you and said, "Look, I'm too depressed and scattered to be in a relationship. What do you think? Do you think I'm too depressed and scattered to be in a relationship?"
Nice. How did that go when you did that?
It went really well. He took it very seriously. He got really into it, and he said, "Well, it's true. Your situation is challenging. And you're used to living with a spouse. You're used to living with kids. Now you have to be, now you're getting used to living alone. So it's not unexpected to be depressed, given your situation. And you always thrived on having deep interpersonal relationships with other people, and once you start engaging with other people, you might not be as isolated and lonely, and eventually you will develop a deep interpersonal relationship with someone, a deep interaction. So that's how he talked to his friend. And I asked him if he was just being nice to his friend or if he really meant it. And he said no, he felt that really deeply. And he said he could recognize that his friend had special qualities that a person would like. And when I said, gee, Sam, let's say that's not his name, Sam, do you think, if we stepped out of that role play and could, you talk to your friend that way, but your friend is not just it's a special friend, it's a twin or a clone of yours. Could you also talk to yourself that way? And, he really paused and said, and took it in and said, yes, I could. I really could.
Wow.
And that offered him some very deep resolution and acceptance.
Right. And by the way, some listeners who are therapists will resent what you're saying right now because they'll say, oh, that's too easy. I've tried that. It doesn't work. Why does this work? What is the key to this amazing rapid changes?
Well, to me, it works because of the assessment of the resistance. Because I'm not arguing with him to change. I'm arguing with him not to change. And I'm saying you have these negative thoughts and the challenging feelings show awesome things about you.
Yeah.
Your love for others, your high standard, your respect for others, your passion, the appropriateness.
Yeah.
Your niceness. Why change?
Yeah.
And then he argued with me, no, I want to change because I'm lonely.
Yeah.
Because the loneliness hurts more.
Yeah, team is an art form, but it's also a systematic procedure like open heart surgery. You can do open heart surgery in 3 hours, and you're working with him for 3 hours doing open heart surgery, but you're moving systematically. You don't just throw techniques at a patient and expect them to be successful. That's what we used to do in cognitive therapy, thinking it was all methods and techniques. And you have to start out by testing how depressed is he at the beginning of the session, and we saw that his scores were severe, 90% depressed, as bad as a hospitalized inpatient getting electroconvulsive therapy. They're not worse than 90 most of the time.
Right.
And then you empathize and you paraphrase what the patient's saying. You see the world through his eyes. You provide warmth and support without trying to help him, and then only after you get an A from the patient on empathy do you get into the assessment of resistance and do a mind-blowing job on that. And now the patient is so softened up that when we come in with identify the distortions and double standard techniques, these simple techniques become powerful and helpful. What other techniques did you do?
Well, we only did one more technique, and that was the evaluation, the externalization of voices. And that's where I say to him his negative thoughts, and then he tries to defeat the thought. And he can defeat it in one of 4 ways. He can defend against it, like examining the evidence, like being an attorney. He can, really have that kind of defense. I actually like that one too much in my own work. He could find some acceptance in it. He could counterattack it, or he could use a combination of all of them.
Right. So how did it go when you did it? Why do you do externalization of voices? It sounded like the double standard worked pretty well. What are we trying?
Well, that's because when I asked him after the double standard, I checked in with him and said, well, we started off, your belief in that thought, I'm too depressed and scattered to be in a relationship, was 100. What is it now? And he said, well, that was really helpful, but I still believe it 50%.
50%?
So I said, yeah.
Went
so
from
I said,
100
hey, well,
to 50, okay.
Yeah. So I said, well, let's do one more. And honestly, 3 hours, it sounds like a long time, but we really only had time to attack one of the negative thoughts. And we chose, and I asked him to choose the one that was the most important to him. And he did choose, I'm too depressed and scattered to be in a relationship.
Yeah, I see, right, okay. So what happened when you did the externalization of voices?
Well, we had to do it a couple of times, a couple of iterations where he did it, and then you want to, attack it and win huge. It can't be small or a large win. It has to be a huge win. So the first time I said, Sam, you're just too depressed and scattered to be in a relationship.
And
he
now
came
you're
back
playing, who are you in this role play?
well, I'm the negative Sam.
Okay.
And he's the positive Sam.
Right.
And his first thought was, we all have phases in our lives, and the phase I'm in my life right now is kind of depressed and scattered, but that doesn't mean I'm going to be in this phase forever. And I said, oh, who won that? And he said he thought he won that, but he only thought he won at large.
Not huge.
Not huge.
Then you did a role reversal, and what happened there?
We did a role reversal, and I don't want to tell you what I said. I wanted to go back to we did a role reversal. I did it. And then, it doesn't matter if I win it huge. It matters if he won it huge. So then we went back to him.
So you modeled a better response.
I modeled a response to that one huge.
One huge, yeah, okay.
And so then it was his turn again. And I said to him again, Sam, I'm so sorry to tell you, you're too depressed and scattered to be in a relationship. And he said, I'm getting my notes out. He said, you know what? I am depressed and scattered, but I can still meet someone. And even just the tone of his voice, he said it with a lot of pride, and he felt that he won that huge.
Cool.
So in this paradox, him saying, you're right, and accepting it, gave him the power to win, to defeat it.
So it was a combination of self-defense and acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
Both.
Right.
And was there a big change in affect at that point?
There was a huge change in affect. There's even in his he sat up straighter, he looked happier, his voice was stronger.
Yeah, that is.
And when we went over the daily mood log, he did go down to 0. That wasn't his goal.
His emotions went to 0?
Did go down to 0.
Oh, wow. So you're saying a patient went from extreme depression, extreme hopelessness, extreme aloneness, extreme frustration, and extreme upset to total recovery in a single therapy session?
Yes, he did want to keep 3% of anxiety because he felt like he needed that and he needed a little anxiety to help him write the blurb about himself for his online dating site.
Cool, awesome. Now, how did that affect you when you saw this, had this sudden change in your patient?
That's such a great question because it was extremely rejuvenating and enervating, and it was so exciting. I just felt so honored to have gone through that journey with him. And it sounds sort of corny, but I just felt so much warmth and kindness and really love for him and hopeful. It was awesome.
Yeah, I think we've said this before, but it bears repeating that most people, the people who I know who are psychotherapists are pretty poor, most of them, financially. I think people have this idea that mental health professionals are some wealthy ones, and there are some who charge a lot and make a lot of money, but most are not in that range. I know for myself, I treat everyone for free, so I'm not making any money, but our riches is what you just described, that joy that we get when we see someone else recover. It touches us. And that's
Yes.
also a Buddhist notion. It's probably a Jewish notion. It's probably a Christian notion. It's probably a Muslim notion, but that we're one. The Buddhists say that evil is the consequence of thinking we're separate from the rest of reality. That's the cause of all evil. But you see these Buddhist notions that we're one, because when I have a session, if I hurt a patient, and that happened to me recently, it puts me in hell.
Oh, yeah.
And then when you have a session like this and someone goes from severe despair to 0, probably to joy and euphoria, then we're one, because I feel that euphoria too. Well, we've gone on and on here a little bit. Your story is totally a beautiful one.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing that, and also shows that people can learn to do team and deliver these incredible results. Initially, I was going to say, but who could afford a 3-hour session? Well, my question would be, who can't? Because if you don't, then you're going to have 1-hour sessions, and I've seen them go on with therapists for years.
Right.
How expensive is 300 1-hour sessions, and you're still depressed?
Right. And actually, after this session, we probably will have one more session for relapse prevention, and then we're probably not going to continue working together, because he got what he needed.
Yeah.
And he felt relief.
That's neat. But
And
that's
healed.
one last point, is that once the patient is euphoric, and that's called feeling better, then you need to take that 20 minutes or 30 minutes at most before you discharge them, have them come back and do your relapse prevention training. People who have been listening, who heard the fantastic Atlanta live demonstration with Dr. Michael and my co-therapist, Tyann, we did the relapse prevention training at the end of the workshop, and it was just so important and so powerful. You could just feel the change in his voice. It was incredibly powerful, and if you want to see exactly how to do relapse prevention training, listen to that podcast. It was just, I don't remember what number it was, but
187.
187, number 187, great. Well, do we have anything else, or should we?
I don't think we have anything else yet.
So, is it sayonara time?
I think it is.
Well, thank you all for listening. We really appreciate your support, and you can help us by telling, if you like our podcast and you have friends, tell them about them. If you have a friend who's depressed or anxious or having intimacy problems, relationship problems, we get a lot of email from people who say, I listened to the podcast and it changed my life. Therapy has never helped, pills have never helped, but I listening to your podcast or reading your books like Feeling Good, or the new one coming out in September, Feeling Great, that these things can really change people's lives. So you may give people a gift by telling them about the Feeling Good podcast and the other free resources available on feelinggood.com. One other last thing, I've heard through the grapevine, Rhonda, something really exciting and weird and far out. You can
What's
tell
that?
me if it's true, or if you've heard this rumor. But I've heard rumor that there might be a Feeling Great Center opening up soon, up in the North Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area. Is that true?
Yes, that is true. I am opening up a Feeling Great Therapy Center with 4 other colleagues. Amy Spector, who was on one of our podcasts and works with teens, Philip Lalonis, Sarah Hester, who's part of the Feeling Good Institute right now, and Nia Lozano, who's an incredibly great psychiatrist. I'd love to get her on to the podcast. She works with people who've had their first psychotic break and uses team to help them.
Wow,
And
that's a crew.
yes.
You got a talent and really cool, warm front people. Well, we're excited about that. We'll tell you more as the time approaches. Is there any rough draft of when it might open? And maybe it's
We're going to open July 1st. Right now, we're just going to be doing virtual
Hmm.
online therapy, and then when things get safer, we'll see people in person.
Well, that's
And
very,
Philip is doing
very
some pretty exciting.
We'll keep
Yeah.
all of you fans posted when that's when Rhonda's new Feeling Great Therapy Center opens up. I can feel the excitement already.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you everyone for listening. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this episode under the podcast page. You will also find archives of previous episodes and many resources for therapists and non-therapists. We welcome your comments and questions. If you want to support the show, please share the podcast with people who might benefit from it. You could also go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. The theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.